Rain hammered Edinburgh's Blackhall streets on October 18, 2005, a relentless curtain cloaking the night. At 10:43 p.m., Johnny Haynes gripped the wheel of his Renault Espace, navigating Western Garden's treacherous bend. The tires lost their hold. Suddenly, violently, the car lurched, spun across the wet asphalt, and smashed into a tree with a sickening crunch. Silence swallowed the chaos inside the wreckage. Haynes, a colossus who once bent football to his will, clung to life, his wife Avril beside him, a witness to the end. By morning, at 71, he was gone, his breath stolen by a crash that stunned the sport. Fulham's statement mourned, "Our greatest ever player, Pele, wired from Brazil, grieving a genius lost." The Guardian etched his name in ink, praising a vision that, for an instant, football turned its gaze to a fallen pioneer. That gaze, though, dimmed with unsettling speed. As flowers piled beneath Craven Cottage's Johnny Haynes stand and fans chanted his name into the autumn air, a gnawing question emerged. Why does his echo falter when others thunder? This wasn't just a death. It was a mirror held to football's fractured memory. Haynes had sculpted midfield mastery in the 50s, captained England at 22, and cracked open wage limits to forge a new era. Yet by 2005, his name hovered on oblivion's edge, outshone by Charlton's World Cup gleam or Best's electric swagger. Was it his fidelity to Fulham over trophies, the absence of spotlight in his quieter years? Or does football simply discard its trailblazers? His final act wasn't the crash itself, but the decades of fading that preceded it. That night, rain-slicked, unforgiving, snuffed out a man who'd orchestrated England's rhythm against Brazil in '62, who'd turned down Inter Milan for Fulham's soul. 56 caps, 18 goals from the engine room, a legacy of precision, none of it enough to secure his place among the Pantheon's loudest. The Times called him unmatched. Yet, unmatched isn't eternal. This story begins where his ended, not in sorrow, but in pursuit of truth. How does a figure who sculpted the sport's bones slip from its grasp? Johnny Haynes isn't just a name to mourn, he's a reckoning football owes itself. If his shadow ignites your hunger for the game's buried truths, stay with us and subscribe. Unearthing voices like his is what drives us forward. In the 1950s, football was a battlefield, gritty, direct, a war of attrition where brawn often trumped brain. Into this fray stepped Johnny Haynes, a wiry 18-year-old who didn't just play the game but rewrote its language. His debut for Fulham in '52 wasn't a headline, it was a prophecy. By the mid-50s, map reports buzzed with awe. Haynes averaged over 50 completed passes per game, a number that shamed entire teams in an era of long balls and mud-caked boots. This wasn't luck, it was vision, surgical, panoramic, decades ahead. His signature blind passes, delivered without a flicker of hesitation, turned defenders into spectators, their heads spinning as the ball found its mark. Two-footed with chilling precision, he could thread a needle from 40 yards with either boot, a riddle opponents couldn't crack. Pele, watching him dismantle Brazil's defense in a '62 friendly, didn't mince words. The best passer I ever saw. Haynes didn't chase the ball, he commanded it. In a 1958 clash against Arsenal, he notched 3 assists without breaking stride. His movements, so fluid that Highbury's crowd fell silent, then erupted. Statisticians later dug into the archives. His assist tally that season outpaced every midfielder in England, a feat buried under the era's scant records. This was no showman's flair, it was mastery. A mind operating seconds ahead of its time. Where others saw chaos, Haynes saw patterns. Where they kicked, he sculpted. His ambidexterity wasn't just skill, it was a weapon, forcing defenses to guess and fail. A teammate, Jimmy Hill, put it starkly, "Johnny didn't pass to you, he passed through them." By the late '50s, he turned Fulham's modest pitch into a canvas, painting attacks that baffled the First Division's titans. This wasn't a fluke, it was the birth of the modern playmaker. Before Xavi, Metromen, Barcelona, or Pirlo carved Italy's lines, Haynes laid the blueprint. His influence rippled beyond stats. Coaches began sketching formations around his style, prying football from its rigid shell. In '57, a 5-1 rout of Newcastle saw him dictate every goal, 2 assists, one a 50-yard diagonal that split the Magpies like glass. The Daily Mirror called it a clinic in control, yet no Ballon d'Or nod followed. Why? His stage was Fulham, not Real Madrid. His era lacked cameras to immortalize every flick. Still, those who saw him knew this was the game's future, unfolding in real time. How does a pioneer so pivotal fade from the tale? His craft demands we look closer at the man who didn't just play football but redefined its soul. By 1960, Johnny Haynes stood at a crossroads most players only dream of. Inter Milan, flush with Italian leering, tabled an offer that promised European glory. Manchester United, reeling from Munich's scars, saw in him a savior. He was 26, a maestro at his peak, his passes slicing first division defenses like a blade through silk. Yet Haynes turned them down. Everyone. For 2 decades, from his 1952 debut to his 1970 farewell, he tethered his fate to Fulham, a club perched on London's Thames, rarely a contender for silverware. This wasn't indecision. It was devotion, a vow to a modest ground and its faithful that baffled the footballing world. In an era when stars chased trophies, Haynes chose roots, transforming Craven Cottage into a fortress of his own making. His loyalty wasn't passive, it was Herculean. In the 1957-58 season, Fulham teetered in the second division, a middling side with faint hope. Haynes rewrote their script, 18 goals from midfield, a tally absurd for his role, dragged them to promotion. The Times dubbed it a one-man crusade, while teammate Tosh Chamberlain recalled, "He carried us, literally." A year later, against Manchester City, he conjured 4 assists in a 5-2 rout, his vision turning journeymen into threats. From 52 to 70, he played 658 games, more than anyone in Fulham's history, pouring his prime into a club that never clinched a major title. Inter's millions couldn't sway him. United's prestige fell flat. Why? "Fulham's my home," he once said, a quiet creed that echoed louder than any transfer rumor. This fidelity forged more than stats. It built a legacy. Today, the Johnny Haynes stand looms over Craven Cottage, a monument to a bond unbroken. In 61, when the wage cap shattered and his £100 sterling deal made headlines, fans didn't see greed, they saw a king securing his kingdom. His presence rippled beyond the pitch, local kids mimicked his swagger and match days swelled with chants of Johnny. Yet outside Fulham's gates, this choice dimmed his star. While Bobby Moore lifted cups and Jeff Hurst edged 66 into lore, Haynes' stage stayed small, his brilliance a whisper against their roars. Was loyalty his cage or his crown? 2 decades at one club didn't just defy the odds, it defied football's hunger for glory. Leaving a question, does staying true cost a man his place in the game's eternal song? On October 18, 1956, Johnny Haynes, barely 22, strode onto Wembley's hallowed turf as England's captain, the youngest ever to wear the armband. Against Northern Ireland, he didn't just lead, he dictated, threading passes that carved open a 3-1 win. Over 56 caps from 54 to 62, his boots stitched England's attack into something fluid, a departure from the Three Lions' rigid past. In the 1958 World Cup, facing a Soviet side stacked with steel, he bent their shape with a 40-yard diagonal that sparked a draw, England's lifeline in Sweden. 4 years later in Chile against Chile's home roar, he ran the show again. 2 assists, a 3-1 rout, his rhythm unshaken. The FA's own logs note his unerring control as the pulse of those campaigns. This wasn't fleeting brilliance, it was a midfield general rewriting England's song. Off the pitch, Haynes struck an even bolder chord. In January 1961, he stared down football's £20 a week wage cap, a relic chaining players to pittances, while clubs raked in gate cash. Backed by the PFA, he demanded £100 from Fulham, a figure that sparked gasps and headlines. The FA balked, the press roared. By year's end, the cap crumbled. Haynes became the game's first £100 earner, a triumph sealed by his resolve. FA records show the ripple. By 65, average wages doubled league-wide, a seismic shift traced to his stand. This wasn't greed, it was justice, a recognition that talent deserved its foundations, a dual legacy of craft and courage. Yet his spotlight flickered. Where Bobby Charlton's 66 heroics cemented eternity, Haynes' 56, caps 18 as captain, earned quieter praise. No World Cup medal adorned his mantle. His England tale lacks that golden frame. Was it timing, the 58 and 62 exits, or did his wage fight cast him as a mercenary, not a martyr? His peers knew better. Bobby Moore called him irreplaceable, a nod to the man who'd mentored England's midfield evolution. Today, every Premier League star banking millions owes a thread to that 61 rebellion. How does a captain who led with steel and broke the sport's chains fade from its forefront? Haynes didn't just wear the shirt, he redefined what it could mean. Johnny Haynes didn't just bend football's rules, he broke its chains. In May 1960, England's squad boarded a plane for a tour of apartheid South Africa, a regime rotting with racial rot. Haynes stayed behind. No press conference, no grand speech, just a quiet refusal to step onto soil stained by injustice. The FA shrugged, teammates went silent, newspapers barely blinked. Yet that act, subtle as it was, roared louder than any goal he'd scored. This wasn't posturing, it was principle, a stand against a system football too often ignored. At 25, he'd already seen the game's underbelly, players exploited, voices muzzled, and he wouldn't bend. His absence from that tour, confirmed by FA itineraries, marked him as more than an athlete, a man who'd rather lose a cap than his conscience. He struck again in '59, years before his wage war. While peers toiled under club thumbs, Haynes hired an agent, a move so alien it stunned the sport. In a North London office, he inked a deal to negotiate his worth, a first in English football. By 1970, Players' Union records show 80% of pros had agents, a title shift sparked by his pen. This wasn't vanity, it was foresight, a crack in the wall of players' servitude. The Daily Express sneered, Haynes the businessman, but he saw what they didn't. Talent deserved power. His 61 wage fight built on this, toppling the £20 sterling 0p cap. Yet his agent Gambit laid the stone. Quietly revolutionary, fiercely modern. He didn't chase profit. He claimed rights, reshaping how players face the game's machine. This maverick streak didn't win him medals, but it forged a path. When he snubbed Inter Milan's riches, when he stood firm against apartheid, when he bargained for his due, Haynes revealed a core of steel beneath his silk touch. Teammate George Cohen once said, Johnny didn't bow, not to anyone. Yet these acts, bold and rare, rarely headline his tale. They're footnotes to his passes, overshadowed by flashier feats. Was it too subtle for football's brash stage? Too early for its time? Today, every star with a £1 million deal or a moral stance owes a debt to that defiance. How does a man who shifted the sport's soul off the pitch slip from its memory? Haynes didn't just play. He challenged what playing could mean. In 1970, Johnny Haynes hung up his boots after 658 games. His last kick for Fulham, a quiet nod to 2 decades of brilliance. At 36, he didn't chase punditry or coaching glory. He slipped away, trading Craven Cottage's roar for Edinburgh's hush. There, in Scotland's capital, he lived as a mechanic, fixing cars with the same steady hands that once split defenses. For 35 years, he carved a life of stillness, far from the floodlights, unnoticed by football's swelling noise. Then, on October 18, 2005, fate struck. Rain-slicked Western Gardens Road claimed him at 71, his Renault Espace crumpling against a tree. The crash was swift, brutal, brain injuries too severe, doctors said, despite a fight to save him. Fulham mourned instantly, a light extinguished, their statement read. Pele echoed, a genius gone. Yet beyond those walls, the sport barely stirred. His death mirrored his retirement, a flicker, then fade. Flowers piled at Craven Cottage, the Johnny Haynes stand stood sentinel, a tribute etched in steel and stone. But football's broader memory? It faltered. No Ballon d'Or nods had ever graced his career, despite peers like Bobby Moore deeming him irreplaceable. His 56 caps, his 100-pound stand, his apartheid defiance. Feats that should have cemented a tight, dissolved into whisper. Was it Fulham's modest stage, the 50s and 60s lack of global lenses, or football's habit of burying its pioneers under shinier tails? In 62, he'd outplayed Brazil's best. In 58, he dragged Fulham to promotion. Yet by 2005, Charlton's cup and best's flair drowned his echo. The Times mourned him as unmatched. But unmatched faded fast. Edinburgh's quiet streets held him for decades, a world away from the game he'd shaped. His statue at Fulham endures, a lone beacon. But does it shine bright enough? Post-70, he'd shunned the spotlight, content with anonymity, while others built legends on louder stages. That crash didn't just end a life, it exposed a void, a sport that forgets its architects. His peers knew his worth. Fans who saw him still whisper his name. But the game's grand narrative, it rolls on indifferent. How does a man who sculpted football's bones, on pitches, in paychecks against injustice, drift into shadow? This isn't just his end. It's a challenge to ask why his light dims when others blaze eternal. Imagine Johnny Haynes stepping onto today's pitches, his blind passes pinging off Premier League boots, his vision dissected on touchline screens, his stats lighting up data boards. In 2025, he'd rival De Bruyne's precision, outpace Xavi's tempo, command wages dwarfing millions. A maestro from the 50s, reborn, would tower among giants. Yet history keeps him small. 56 caps, 18 goals, a wage revolution, a stand against apartheid. His ledger brims with feats that shaped football's spine. Pele dubbed him the best passer, Bobby Moore, irreplaceable. So why doesn't his name ring beside Cruyff's flair or Maradona's fire? Fulham's modest stage held no World Cups, his era's grainy reels faded fast, but evidence screams his worth. A playmaker who burst a role, a captain who led with steel, a rebel who broke chains. Football cherishes its icons. Charlton's triumph. Best stance, but Haynes slips with its fingers. His statue at Craven Cottage stands firm, a silent claim to glory, yet the game's loudest tales drown it out. Then was loyalty his undoing, tethering him to a club without silver? Did his quiet exit to Edinburgh bury his light? Or does the sport hoard praise for flash over foundation? His crash in 05 ended a life, not a legacy, yet that legacy wanes, a shadow where a colossus should stand. This isn't just his story, it's a mirror to football's memory, a call to weigh who we crown eternal. If his craft outshone his time, if his courage reshaped the game, shouldn't his echo thunder still? His shadow lingers on pitches he mastered, in rights he won, through voices he inspired. Johnny Haynes isn't a footnote, he's a reckoning, a reminder that brilliance doesn't need trophies to endure. Does football owe him more, not just remembrance, but reverence? We say yes, if his tale grips you. If the game's unsung architects demand their due, don't just watch, subscribe, and join us. Unearthing these truths is our fight. Keep his name alive with us.